this chapter, we'll focus on cognitive development in infancy and early childhood. So here's an overview of the chapter. We'll talk about Piaget. He is the person who we spend a lot of time talking about when it comes to cognitive development. If you remember, Piaget has 4 stages to his theory. So in this chapter, we'll talk about the first 2 stages. So the sensory motor stage and the pre-operational stage. We'll also talk about information processing, Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, and language development. So let's start by focusing on cognitive development, and we'll focus here on Piaget. So let's start with the basic principles of cognitive development. Researchers studying cognitive development are interested in how children think. They want to characterize thinking, and they want to describe how it changes over the course of the lifespan. So for people studying cognitive development, an important question to ask is, where does knowledge come from? Now, this question of what children know really wasn't tested until Jean Piaget came along. So Piaget actually worked in a lab with Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Binet and Simon, but they're associated with intelligence testing. So Binet and Simon were attempting to develop questionnaires to predict children's success in school. And they hired Piaget to administer these tests. But Piaget was more interested in the types of answers children gave rather than the number of correct answers that they gave. And what he observed was that children of different ages knew different amounts of information, but they also looked at the world differently. So children of different ages differed quantitatively in terms of the amount and degree of knowledge that they had, as well as qualitatively. So the kinds of knowledge that they had also really differed. So this observation really set the tone for Piaget's research from the very beginning. So Piaget approached infant cognition. He wanted to characterize what infants think, what they know. Because one thing that he noticed was infants don't think and know in adult-like ways as far as he could see. So his theory, especially the earlier stages of his theory of development, is actually based on unstructured observations from his own children. So what's really cool about this is it is easy to observe a lot of his concepts in young kids. So from observing behaviors like these in his own children, he amazingly came up with a very comprehensive theory of development. So from what he saw, Piaget concluded that children's minds were really not like adults. He didn't think that knowledge was innate and adult-like from the start. What he found was there was some intrinsic activity. So children are intrinsically curious. They actively initiate and seek out stimulation, and this is what drives development. So in other words, children are active little scientists or explorers of their world. He also noted that development progresses in discrete stages. Okay, so remember, this is a stage theory, right? So this is going to be continuous or discontinuous. It's discontinuous because it's based on stages. So rather than gradual accumulation of knowledge or skills, Piaget thought that cognition goes through this series of abrupt changes. Remember the pine tree versus the butterfly. So it's more these step-like shifts. So according to Piaget, by acting on the environment, children move through 4 stages of cognitive development, in which psychological structures or schemas, you might also see this as schemes, achieve a better fit with external reality. So Piaget believed that we organize ways of making sense of experience through these schemes or schemas. So schemas are these mental representations that we have of the world, and we use them to understand and respond to situations. So children understand the world with these schemes, these psychological structures that organize experiences into mental categories of related events, objects, and knowledge. So they change constantly to adapt to children's experiences. And so schemas can change with age through two processes: adaptation and organization. So children adapt by refining their schemes and adding new ones. And schemes can then change from physical to functional, conceptual, and abstract as the child develops. Okay, so adaptation then is this tendency to adjust schemes to a particular environmental demand. And Piaget thought that adaptation happens in one of two ways: assimilation and accommodation. So it's important that you understand the difference between assimilation and accommodation. And one little trick that I think is helpful to remember the difference here is assimilate has two S's after the A, and accommodate has two C's after the A. So assimilate, think of similar or same, and for accommodate, think of change for the C's. So with assimilation, what's going on? Well, here the person is incorporating new information into an already existing scheme or already existing physical abilities or ways of understanding. So the scheme stays the same, okay? So assimilation involves fitting new experiences into the same scheme. So this is required so that people can really benefit from their experience. Accommodation then is when your scheme changes. So accommodation happens when behavior or representations are changed as a function of exposure to new information. So this really is helpful because it allows you to deal with completely new data or completely new experiences. So I'm going to talk you through an example. Let's say you go to the zoo with a child and they're seeing a zebra, and this is the first time they've ever seen a zebra. And so they say, look, it's a horse. What are they doing right now? Assimilating or accommodating? Here, the child would be assimilating this information into her scheme for a horse. So then you say to the child, well, yeah, it kind of looks like a horse, but, look at those black and white stripes. That's actually not characteristic of a horse. So when the child's accommodating that information, they're taking into consideration the different properties of a zebra compared to a horse. So when they eventually then learn that, okay, so it looks like a horse, but it's got those black and white stripes, so that's not actually a horse, that's a zebra, then that child has successfully accommodated that information. Can you guys think of any examples from your own life about assimilation and accommodation? Maybe you have kids and you've noticed this. Like lots of times kids will say like, look at the bunny, and it might be a squirrel or a bird instead, but any animal in the yard is a bunny. That would be another example of assimilation. I'd like you guys to watch the video link that I'm going to post, and then tell me whether you think that video is an example of assimilation or accommodation.